I died on an American road during what was supposed to be a routine escort. One moment I was standing beneath a gray winter sky beside a government transport vehicle, listening to radio chatter and watching traffic crawl past a temporary checkpoint. The next, I was on the ground, blood spreading beneath me, the world narrowing into sound and shadow. The attack was fast and precise. A van drifted into the lane the wrong way, not speeding, not dramatic, just wrong. Before my mind fully registered the mistake, gunfire erupted from both sides of the street. Not panic shots. Controlled. Rehearsed. My name is Ethan Caldwell. For 7 years, I worked in a federal tactical program that operates in the space between military logistics and homeland protection. The kind of work that never makes headlines. The kind that exists because certain things must move through the country unseen, especially when global tensions rise quietly behind closed doors. In early January of 2026, our assignments changed. We were tasked with protecting sensitive shipments tied to national infrastructure, cargo valuable not because of what it was, but because of what it enabled. On January 14th, we were positioned at a low-profile checkpoint in a mid-sized American city. Ordinary streets. Ordinary people. Nothing that looked like a battlefield. My partner, Mason, was standing a few feet ahead of me when the first shots cracked. He went down instantly. I moved on instinct, dropping behind cover, shouting into my radio, returning fire toward flashes of movement I barely had time to register. Then I felt a heart in my side. No pain at first, just pressure. Then another hit to my leg that buckled my knee. One round struck my vest. The other found the gap. It tore into an artery. I knew it immediately, not by sight, but by the way strength drained from my body in seconds. My hands felt distant. My breathing turned shallow. The cold crept in fast. I tried to reach Mason. I didn't make it. Sounds blurred. The sky above me flattened into a dull circle. I felt gloved hands pressing hard against my side, heard voices shouting my name, but it all felt far away, like I was already stepping back from the scene. I expected fear. Instead, a deep calm settled over me, heavy, unmistakable. Like the end of a long struggle. Like rest. The last thing I heard was someone yelling, "Stay with me." Then everything went dark. But it wasn't emptiness. I became aware of myself standing above my own body, watching medics work frantically, radios crackling, my team shouting coordinates. I felt no panic. No confusion. Only a stillness so complete it felt intentional. And then I sensed a presence. Not beside me. Not in front of me. Everywhere. Before I could form a thought, light appeared, not from one direction but from all directions at once. It wasn't blinding. It was alive. And somehow it was also inside me. I understood with absolute certainty that my life had not ended. It was about to change. And in that light I knew, before a single word was spoken, that Jesus was there. And he was about to show me what is coming. What he revealed next is the reason I'm speaking now. Because it begins in Greenland. And it does not stay there. The street below me began to lose its weight. I could still see it, the flashing lights, the kneeling medics, the frantic urgency, but it no longer pulled at me. It was like watching a scene through glass. Real but no longer mine. I should have felt panic at the sight of my own body lying there, blood-soaked and unmoving. I should have felt confusion or terror or regret. I felt none of it. There was only peace. Not the fragile calm that comes after danger passes, but something deeper. Something complete. A stillness that didn't numb me, it clarified me. For the first time in my life, every thought felt sharp and unburdened, as if fear had been a background noise I'd carried for years without realizing it. And then I became aware of the presence again. It wasn't approaching me. It didn't need to. It was already there. The light intensified, not brighter in a way that hurt my eyes, but fuller, richer, like reality itself was being turned up. It surrounded me and filled me at the same time, dissolving any sense of distance or direction. I knew who stood before me before I could reason it out. There was no announcement. No question. No doubt. Jesus. His form was difficult to focus on, not because it was vague but because it seemed to exist on more levels than my perception could hold. At moments he appeared as a figure I could almost see clearly. At others he was overwhelming brightness, presence without edges. Yet I felt no fear. Only recognition. "Ethan," his voice said. It didn't come through sound the way voices do. It filled my awareness, gentle and firm, intimate and vast at the same time. "You are not finished." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every response I had ever practiced, every prayer, every question, every word, felt unnecessary in that moment. He knew me completely. Not the version of me shaped by training and duty and reputation, But the hidden parts, the doubts I'd buried, the compromises I'd justified, the moments of quiet faith I'd never spoken out loud. You have walked faithfully in small things, he said. Now I will show you what is coming, because many are not watching and fewer still are listening. The street beneath us dissolved. Not abruptly. Not violently. It simply faded like a memory losing detail, until there was no up or down, no ground or sky. I felt no falling. No movement. Then space itself seemed to open. I found myself suspended high above the earth. Below me stretched a vast expanse of ice and rock, glowing white and blue beneath a thin veil of cloud. The coastline curved gently, sharp fjords cutting into the land like scars. Distant settlements glimmered faintly along the edges, small points of human life clinging to the cold. I knew instantly where I was. Greenland. But this was not how it appeared on maps. The land pulsed with something beneath the surface. Subtle, dark, concentrated in specific regions. It was like watching storm systems gather, not in the atmosphere but in the unseen layers of reality. Watch carefully, Jesus said. What unfolds here will not remain here. As I focused, the image sharpened. I saw movement, ships cutting through newly ice-free waters, aircraft tracing deliberate paths overhead, installations hidden beneath snow and ice activating in synchronized patterns. Then I saw something that made my spirit tighten. Military forces. Not one nation. Many. They were converging quietly, deliberately, American units, Chinese detachments, Russian assets, European task groups, far more than had ever been acknowledged publicly. Bases buried deep beneath the ice. Technologies operating far beyond what I believed existed. They believe they are here for resources, Jesus said. For minerals. For position. For power. His voice carried sorrow. They do not understand what they are truly contending for. As he spoke, the darkness beneath the land shifted, responding to the presence above it, as if the surface conflict was only the echo of something far older and far deeper. This land has become a prize, he continued, because the enemy has labored for generations to prepare it. What men call strategy is only the surface of a far greater war. I watched as forces maneuvered, as plans formed, as tensions coiled tighter with every decision made in distant capitals. And then he said something that made everything slow inside me. What you are seeing is not inevitable. I turned toward him, though I still could not fully grasp his form. My people still have time, he said. But not much. The weight of those words pressed into me, not as fear but as responsibility. I understood then that I was not being shown this for my sake. I was being shown this because I would be sent back. And what he would reveal next would make that burden heavier still. Because the war over Greenland was not only political. And it was not only physical. It was spiritual. And it had already begun. As Jesus spoke, the image beneath us changed. What I had been seeing, troop movements, ships, aircraft, hidden bases, began to feel like only the outer skin of something much larger. The surface details remained, but they faded slightly as though another layer was being revealed underneath. And then I saw it. The spiritual dimension that existed alongside everything I thought I understood. Darkness gathered over certain regions of Greenland, not like clouds but like weight. That's intentional. Alive. It pressed downward, concentrating over command centers, underground facilities, and strategic sites buried beneath ice and stone. Within that darkness, shapes moved. They were not human. They were vast, towering presences, their forms difficult to define, constantly shifting as if they were not fully bound to physical rules. They hovered above military installations and decision hubs, leaning close to rooms where plans were being made. Whispering. I could not hear their words at first, but I could feel their effect. Confidence hardened into arrogance. Caution twisted into aggression. Compromise disappeared entirely. These are not merely human conflicts, Jesus said. What you see unfolding is being guided. As he spoke, I was allowed to perceive what the generals and officials could not. Every major decision, every escalation, every deployment, every refusal to step back, sent ripples through this unseen realm. The darkness reacted instantly, amplifying pride, feeding fear, rewarding ambition. They believe they are acting in their nation's best interest, he continued. They do not know they are being moved. I watched as leaders in distant capitals gathered around polished tables, studying maps and data, convinced they were in control. Yet above and around them, those dark entities pressed closer, weaving influence into thought itself. It was not possession. It was persuasion. And it was terrifyingly effective. The enemy has prepared this moment patiently, Jesus said. For decades, pieces have been positioned. Treaties signed. Infrastructure laid. Minds shaped. All waiting for conditions to align. The vision shifted again. I saw small clashes breaking out across Greenland, incidents that would later be described as accidents, misunderstandings, or isolated events. A patrol crossing an invisible line. A radar system misreading a signal. A ship altering course at the wrong moment. Each incident seemed minor. Together they formed a pattern. These sparks will be used to justify what comes next, Jesus said. As the conflicts grew, something else became clear. The people of Greenland were not the target. I saw families in coastal towns watching unfamiliar flags appear near their homes. Fishing villages evacuated, temporarily. Ancient communities displaced to make room for installations they were told would bring security and investment. They did not invite this, Jesus said, and there was grief in his voice. They did not ask to stand at the center of this convergence. I saw checkpoints become permanent. Foreign troops on streets where children once played. Laws rewritten under emergency powers. Daily life slowly reshaped around military necessity. But even this was not the true focus. Jesus drew my attention deeper. Look beyond what men are fighting over, he said. And suddenly I could see it, how the darkness beneath the ice responded to every step taken above it. How each base constructed, each tunnel drilled, each facility expanded brought the surface world closer to something it did not understand. The enemy was not reacting. He was anticipating. These forces are being gathered for a reason they cannot see, Jesus said. They believe they are securing the future. He paused. They are securing access. I felt a chill pass through me, though I no longer had a body to feel cold. Access to what? Before I could ask, the vision shifted once more. This time Jesus did not lift me higher. He took me down. Down through layers of ice and stone. Down past the reach of human instruments. Down into depths that had been hidden for far longer than modern history records. And as the surface faded above us, the darkness below grew heavier, thicker, more deliberate. Whatever lay beneath Greenland was not dormant. It was waiting. And humanity was walking straight toward it, convinced it was chasing progress. What I was about to see next would make the war above the ice seem almost insignificant by comparison. We passed through the frozen ground as if it were mist. Layer after layer dissolved beneath us. Ice, rock, pressure, darkness, until the concept of depth itself seemed meaningless. I sensed we were far below anything humanity publicly acknowledged, far below where drilling records ended or seismic maps reached. And then I saw it. Vast chambers carved into the earth. They were not natural. The scale alone made that impossible. These spaces stretched outward in geometric precision, supported by structures that looked ancient yet impossibly intact. Surfaces shimmered with materials I couldn't identify, neither metal nor stone, yet stronger than both. Light pulsed softly along the walls, responding as though it were alive. Technology filled these chambers. Not the kind I recognized from classified briefings or experimental programs. This was something else entirely. Systems that bent space subtly, that distorted distance, that hummed with energy I could feel pressing against my awareness. And threaded through all of it was darkness. Not absence of light but presence. Thick. Intentional. A spiritual weight so heavy it made everything above the surface feel thin and fragile by comparison. What is this place? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. Jesus did not look away from what lay before us. The enemy has been preparing for this hour far longer than most realize, he said. What you see here is only one node in a network that spans the earth. As he spoke, movement caught my attention. Figures walked through the chambers. Some were human, scientists, technicians, personnel wearing insignia I recognized, and others I did not. They moved with purpose, consulting data, adjusting systems, following instructions they believed were entirely their own. But among them were others. Their forms were wrong. They appeared solid one moment, then subtly distorted the next, as though reality itself resisted holding them. Their shapes shifted at the edges, bending in ways that made my spirit recoil. Darkness clung to them like a second skin. These are the principalities and powers spoken of in Scripture, Jesus said. They have waited for generations to be welcomed back into influence. I watched as these entities interacted with the humans, not openly, not dramatically. They instructed. They demonstrated. They guided discoveries. The humans believed they were uncovering lost knowledge. They believed they were rediscovering ancient technology. They believed humanity was finally reclaiming its forgotten potential. They think they are advancing, Jesus said. They do not see they are being prepared. I saw the veil between realms thinning in specific areas within the chambers. Space itself appeared stretched, almost transparent, as if layers of existence were beginning to overlap. Instruments calibrated not only to measure energy, but to pierce boundaries that should have remained sealed. This is why control of this land matters so deeply, Jesus continued. The conflict above is designed to secure what lies beneath. As he spoke, I watched one of the systems activate. The air vibrated. Reality folded inward, subtly at first, then more visibly. A distortion formed, an opening that was not a hole, not a portal as I understood the concept, but a convergence point. Through it I sensed movement, presence. Something was coming through. I felt dread unlike anything I had experienced before, not fear for myself but for the world that had no idea what it was inviting in. These breaches were never meant to be opened this way, Jesus said. There is an appointed time for all things. The enemy seeks to force what he cannot rightfully claim. I watched as the entities emerging through these openings were not arriving randomly. They were being summoned, coordinated, received. And above them all was intention. This was not curiosity. This was preparation. The humans involved did not understand the full scope of what they were enabling. They spoke of breakthroughs, of energy solutions, of medical revolutions, of communication systems that would change civilization. And they were not wrong. But they were blind. Soon, Jesus said, what begins here will no longer be hidden. I saw timelines compressing, months collapsing into weeks. Activity accelerating at a pace that defied caution. The pressure to move faster increasing as unseen deadlines approached. When this emerges into the open, he continued, it will not be presented as invasion or threat. I turned toward him. How will it be explained? I asked. He answered with words that settled like a warning etched into my soul. They will call it discovery. And I knew then that what was coming would not arrive through fear alone. It would arrive wrapped in promise. And the deception would be almost irresistible. The vision shifted again. I was no longer deep beneath the ice. Instead, I was watching the world respond. What had been hidden began to surface. Not all at once, not in a way that caused immediate panic, but carefully, strategically, through controlled releases of information. Press briefings. Scientific conferences. Carefully worded statements from government officials. The first report spoke of anomalies. Unusual energy readings beneath Greenland. Unexpected discoveries during expanded military and research operations. Artifacts that did not fit existing models of human history. The tone was cautious at first. Curious. Academic. Then the breakthroughs began. I saw medical demonstrations where conditions once considered incurable were suddenly reversed. Nervous systems repaired. Degenerative diseases halted. Cellular damage restored with precision that defied known biology. Energy systems followed, clean, abundant, stable. Technologies that produced power without combustion, without waste, without visible fuel. Entire regions lit up overnight, no longer dependent on fragile grids or dwindling resources. Communication advanced next. Systems that operated beyond the limits of distance and delay. Instantaneous connection across continents. Data transfer that ignored the constraints of space itself. The world erupted in celebration. This changes everything, experts said. A new chapter for humanity, commentators declared. The greatest discovery in human history. Jesus stood beside me as I watched the reaction spread. They will not deny the benefits, he said quietly, because the benefits are real. I saw people weeping with gratitude as loved ones were healed. Communities lifted out of poverty by access to limitless energy. Nations announcing the end of resource wars, the beginning of a new era of cooperation. Who wouldn't celebrate? Then the narrative shifted. The explanation for these discoveries was unveiled carefully, wrapped in language designed to soothe skepticism and excite imagination. The technology, they said, was not alien. It was ancient. Evidence was presented. Structures, symbols, genetic markers, reinterpreted texts. The claim spread rapidly that humanity had once been far more advanced than modern science acknowledged. That a lost civilization had existed long before recorded history, possessing knowledge now being rediscovered. These beings are not demons, the experts insisted. They are our ancestors. A previous stage of human evolution. I watched religious leaders from multiple traditions adapt quickly. Sermons were rewritten. Doctrines softened. Ancient texts reinterpreted to make room for this new story. Only a small number recoiled. Do you see the deception? Jesus asked. I did. The enemy was not attacking belief directly. He was redefining it. Rebellion was reframed as enlightenment. Submission to God was recast as limitation. Sin was dismissed as a primitive concept humanity had finally outgrown. And then came the integration. The technology, they explained, was not fully compatible with unmodified human biology. To access its full potential, to receive the most advanced healing, to interface seamlessly with the new systems, adjustments would be required. Minor at first. Implants, enhancements, genetic calibrations. They were voluntary. At first. Those who accepted spoke of clarity, vitality, connection. Their bodies responded faster. Their minds processed information with startling speed. Their emotions stabilized in ways therapy never achieved. Those who refused were not punished. Not yet. They were simply left behind. Hospitals phased out old treatments. Energy access required new interfaces. Financial systems transitioned to platforms only compatible with the integrated population. Refusal became impractical. This is how the separation begins, Jesus said. Not through force but through pressure. I watched families fracture. Parents who embraced the upgrades couldn't understand why their children hesitated. Friends accused one another of fear or stubbornness. Churches split as pastors reassured congregations that this was not spiritual compromise, just progress. But I saw what others could not. Every integration carried a mark in the spiritual realm. Subtle. Permanent. A tether. Those who accepted felt it immediately, though they couldn't name it. A dulling of discernment, a quiet resistance to prayer, an unspoken discomfort with the name of Jesus. Those who refused felt the opposite. Pressure intensified. Isolation grew. Accusations followed. They will say refusal is dangerous, Jesus said. They will say it threatens unity, security, progress itself. And I understood then that the greatest danger was not persecution. It was persuasion. The world was not being conquered by fear. It was being won by promise. And the question every soul would soon face was simple and devastating. Would they choose comfort over truth? Or faith over everything else? The answer would not be made in public declarations. It would be made quietly. In moments when no one was watching. And time, I now saw clearly, was almost gone. The vision tightened, focusing not on nations or systems, but on individuals. I saw people the world would never remember by name. Soldiers stationed far from home, staring at screens filled with data they didn't fully trust. Nurses watching patients walk out of beds they had once been certain would never leave. Engineers realizing the equations they were using worked, even though they shouldn't. And believers, scattered, isolated, watching everything they had been taught to recognize as danger arrive disguised as mercy. These are not villains, Jesus said as I felt his attention rest on them. They are sons and daughters, mothers and fathers. People who want to do good. I could see into their inner lives, not as judgment but as truth. Many were exhausted. Many were afraid. Many were tired of suffering and conflict and waiting for promises to be fulfilled. The new system offered relief. Those who integrated spoke of peace like they had never known. Anxiety faded. Trauma dulled. Decision-making became easier, cleaner, more efficient. Even moral uncertainty seemed to disappear, replaced by a calm confidence that they were on the right side of history. They will say, God would not deny us healing, Jesus said. They will say, God would not stand against unity. They will say, surely this is his provision. But the cost was invisible to the natural eye. I watched believers attempt to pray after integrating. The words felt distant. Scripture felt flat. Worship felt hollow. Not painful, just muted. Like trying to remember a song you once loved but could no longer feel. Others noticed sooner. They refused. And the pressure closed in quickly. Employers required integration for safety compliance. Banks transitioned to systems incompatible with unmodified users. Travel became restricted. Access to education, healthcare, even basic commerce narrowed until refusal meant near total exclusion. They will not call it persecution, Jesus said. They will call it responsibility. I saw believers rationalize. Just this once. Just to protect my children. God understands my heart. Some crossed the line slowly, convincing themselves they could step back later. They could not. Others stood firm and paid dearly. They lost jobs. Friends. Church communities that labeled them divisive or extreme. Some were reported. Others were monitored. All were pressured. But then I saw something else. Those who remained faithful began to change, not outwardly but inwardly. Their prayers deepened. Their dependence on God sharpened. They began hearing his voice with clarity that surprised even them. Angels surrounded them. Not symbolically. Literally. I saw unseen protection divert accidents, soften confrontations, provide food and shelter in ways no human system could explain. Small communities formed quietly, believers sharing resources, skills, lives. They have chosen me over comfort, Jesus said, and I will not abandon them. The contrast was stark. Those who embraced the system gained everything, except peace. Those who refused lost nearly everything, except joy. And then the world demanded leadership. Fear and confusion spread beneath the surface of celebration. Even with miracles and breakthroughs, people sensed something was wrong. Too much was changing too fast. Too many questions went unanswered. Into that uncertainty stepped a figure I had not seen clearly until now. A man. Charismatic. Calm. Unifying. He spoke with confidence that felt almost supernatural. He offered explanations that reconciled science and spirituality, progress and purpose. He promised order without oppression, unity without coercion. The world leaned in. This one will rise quickly, Jesus said. He will offer answers when no one else can. I watched crowds gather. Nations align. Media elevate him as the voice of reason in an unstable time. He will not demand worship, Jesus said softly. Not at first. I felt the weight of what was coming pressed down on me. The choices people thought were temporary were becoming permanent. The lines they believed were flexible were hardening. And the window to decide, truly decide, was closing. What happens to those who are not ready? I asked. Jesus did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried both sorrow and resolve. They will be tested beyond what they believe they can endure. And I understood then that what remained to be shown would not be about systems or leaders. It would be about the final refinement of faith. And who would still stand when everything familiar was taken away. The vision slowed. After everything I had seen, the power, the deception, the speed at which the world reshaped itself, I expected the next scene to be even louder, even more overwhelming. Instead, it became painfully personal. Jesus showed me believers who had assumed they had more time. Churches filled with people singing familiar songs, listening to sermons about hope and grace and future plans. Families discussing careers, investments, long-term goals. Pastors teaching about the end times as something distant, symbolic, safely tucked somewhere beyond their own lives. Nothing about these moments looked sinful. But something was missing. Urgency. They believe I am coming soon, Jesus said, and there was grief in his voice. But they live as though soon means decades. I saw believers who had sensed warning before, small nudges they had dismissed. A stirring to pray more deeply. A call to forgive someone they'd held resentment toward for years. A prompting to loosen their grip on comfort and security. They had always planned to respond later. When the pressure arrived, many were unprepared. Systems collapsed faster than they expected. Integration became mandatory almost overnight. The choice they thought would come gradually arrived suddenly, without space to breathe. Some panicked. I watched parents hold their children and weep, torn between faith and fear. I saw believers who had spoken confidently about standing firm crumble under the weight of responsibility when survival was no longer theoretical. They did not think the cost would be this high, I whispered. Jesus nodded. They knew the truth, he said. But they did not let it shape their lives. Some compromised. They told themselves God would understand. That their situation was unique. That they could remain faithful in their hearts while complying outwardly. But the moment they crossed the line, something shifted. Not loudly. Quietly. A heaviness settled where intimacy with God had once been. Prayer became effort. Conviction faded. Scripture felt distant. They were not struck down. They were dulled. Others refused and suffered more than they needed to. They faced hunger because they had stored nothing. Loneliness because they had built no community. Fear because their spiritual lives had been shallow, untested by discipline and sacrifice. They could have prepared, I said. Yes, Jesus replied. The warning was given. Then he showed me something else. Those who had listened. Not perfect people. Not elite believers. Ordinary men and women who had taken the quiet promptings seriously. Who had simplified their lives. Paid off debt. Learned to live with less. Built relationships deeper than Sunday gatherings. Their preparation had not been driven by panic. It had been driven by love. They prayed not out of duty but hunger. They fasted not to impress but to hear clearly. They forgave old wounds because they knew bitterness would poison them when pressure came. When the crisis hit, they were shaken, but not broken. I watched these believers endure loss with peace that made no sense to the world. They were pressured, mocked, excluded, but they were not alone. Angels surrounded them constantly. Not as distant guardians but as active helpers. providing protection, guidance, even supernatural provision when no human system would help them. This is the refining, Jesus said. The fire does not destroy gold. It reveals it. I saw families who had lost everything materially yet radiated joy. Communities that had no formal leadership yet functioned with unity and love. Believers who had been quiet their entire lives speaking truth with boldness they never knew they possessed. They had chosen me long before they were forced to choose. And because of that, when the world demanded allegiance, their answer had already been written in their hearts. Then Jesus showed me something that made time itself feel unstable. A date. I could not see the numbers clearly, but I knew what it represented. A point of no return. After this, he said, the landscape will change. Choices would still exist, but resistance would become exponentially harder. Deception would deepen. Pressure would intensify. What had been difficult would become nearly impossible for those who had delayed. This is why the warning must go out now, Jesus said. Not to terrify but to awaken. I felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto me. This was not information. It was an alarm. And I was being sent back to sound it, whether people wanted to hear it or not. Because what came next would determine who stood firm, and who would be swept away. The light around me began to shift. Not fading, receding, like a tide pulling back after revealing something vast beneath the surface. I felt the pull of my physical body for the first time since leaving it, faint at first, then growing stronger with every passing moment. Jesus turned toward me. Everything else fell away. Ethan, he said, and his voice carried a weight that made my spirit tremble, you will return. I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't known was possible. Relief, fear, gratitude, reluctance, all at once. How can I make them understand? I asked. How can I warn them when so many won't believe? You are not called to convince, he replied. You are called to speak faithfully. He looked at me with an intensity that felt like fire and compassion woven together. Some will mock you. Some will explain away what you say. Others will call it trauma or imagination. Let them. My sheep know my voice and they will hear it, even when it comes through unexpected messengers. The world beneath us began to blur. The enemy's greatest weapon, Jesus continued, is not deception alone. It is delay. The belief that there is more time than there truly is. I understood then. This was not a warning meant for someday. It was for now. For those who hear, he said, tell them this, salvation is not found in systems or preparation or knowledge. It is found in clean faith, in prayer, and in love for God above all else. Those who abide in me will not be overcome. The pull became violent. The vision collapsed inward and suddenly I was falling, not downward but back. Pain exploded through me as I slammed into my body. My lungs convulsed. I gasped violently, choking as air burned its way back into me. Voices erupted around me. Hands gripped my shoulders. He's back, he's got a pulse. The street snapped into focus. Sirens. Lights. Cold. Pain so sharp it almost pushed me back into darkness again. But I was alive. The ride to the hospital passed in fragments. Oxygen masks, shouted vitals, blurred faces. But even through shock and medication what I had seen did not fade. It was clearer than memory. 3 days later I was still alive. Doctors called it unlikely. Some called it impossible. No one could fully explain how I survived the blood loss. I knew why. I'm sharing this now because I was commanded to. Not because I expect everyone to believe me. Not because I claim to understand everything I was shown. But because the warning must be given while there is still time to act on it. What is happening in Greenland is real. The buildup is accelerating. The alignments are forming. And beneath what can be seen, the spiritual battle is reaching its peak. You have a choice to make. Will you continue living as though you have unlimited time to get serious about your faith? Or will you recognize the urgency of this moment? When the deception becomes obvious, it will already be too late to prepare. The foundation must be laid now, in prayer, in repentance, in surrender, in love for God that outweighs comfort, security, and fear. I don't know why I was chosen. I'm not a pastor. Not a prophet. Just a man who died in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps the right place at exactly the right time. What I do know is this, the hour is later than you think. Greenland is only the beginning. And when the moment comes that forces every soul to choose, only those already rooted in genuine relationship with God will stand. Choose wisely. Choose now. Because the time you think you have may already be gone.